Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Keep Indiana Learning's book study. My name is Melissa Wally, and I'm a digital learning coach with Keep Indiana Learning. Whether you are new to our book study or if you've been following along, we are so glad you are joining us today. Our episode is focusing on Chapter 5 of UDL and Blended Learning by Katie Novak and Catelyn Tucker. And I'd like to start off by introducing myself. My name is Melissa Wally. I work for Hanover Community Schools in Cedar Lake as an educational technology specialist. And Diana Knox and I are here today as usual. And we also have a guest joining our conversation today, Amy Stevens.
Yay! Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Stevens. I am a Keep Indiana Learning digital learning coach along with Melissa and Diana and a wonderful cohort that we've got representing our state. I am in my, oh my goodness, I think 19th year, holy cow, of education, predominantly in elementary education. And I am currently serving the South Henry School Corporation as not only a K-6 project Lead the Way teacher, grade 6 is new this year, but also as a technology integration specialist with our K-12 staff. So I am just so honored to be here and to talk about Chapter 5 with y'all. This is so exciting.
We're so excited you're here with us because Melissa and Amy and I, we work as digital learning coaches. We also just recently did a pretty intense learning experience ourselves. So we can see both sides of this lens as students and as educators or facilitators, as we're going to talk about today. My name is Diana Knox. I am from Clay Community Schools in Brazil, and this is my 25th year in education. But it's my 7th when I made this foray into educational technology as a technology instructional specialist. So I'm excited to be part of this study and part of the Keep Indiana Learning family. So this chapter, first of all, the title gave it all away, and that was Facilitator, Channel Your Inner Pigeon Fancier. And I confess, I learned some new things just in the title because I didn't know what a pigeon fancier was. And I was 100% unsure if I was going to pronounce it correctly because the language teacher in me was like, well, is it French? Is it fancy?
I did too.
No, I looked up the pronunciation, fancier. But the longtime farm girl in me can totally relate because it is a keeper and a breeder of pigeons. Who knew that pigeons were so valuable? I love, we've talked a lot in this book about how much we enjoy the personal narratives that Catelyn and Katie provide, because it makes things so relatable. And so I love that she started out with the fact that a pigeon sighting was very unique in her corner of the world, where I live in a corner of the world where a pigeon sighting is not uncommon. So to make that connection and to see the different sides of that coin, where it was very interesting. But I loved this story about a pigeon fancier. And so when we talk about Benny, that's where it was right off the bat. They had a pigeon show up in their yard and it was a surprise to them. And the children were very concerned about Benny. A storm system came through and Benny was outside in it. And then Benny was still there when the storm system passed. And it was pretty intense. Like we're talking like little tornadoes and trees were down. And the children were very concerned about Benny and said, it's somebody's pet. And she said, well, what are you talking about? Well, they realized then it had a band. The children had seen that it had a band on its leg. And so as she said, I knew nothing about what the band meant, but as a pet owner, I was an expert learner because I knew that it was probably something to do with identification. And so she did what we all do. She turned to her friend Google, and she figured out that the information on the band provided the information for the, what was the name? What did they call it? the coop where they were raised. I should have remembered that we raise chickens. So we have chicken coops on our farm. So they have pigeon coops. And so then through that, she could identify the coop. And then when she called them, she got some information and they said, which one do you have? And she took a guess. There was a number attached to the identifier for the coop. And he said, oh my gosh, you have Benny. And so Benny was a very young pigeon and was in the early stages of his training, had never flown more than a mile and ended up 47 miles from home. And so it was interesting to talk about how then going into, she learned about the training that pigeons go through. And we've probably all heard of homing pigeons. Mm-hmm. That's immediately what I thought of. And so the keeper actually said, Benny's in a crucial part of his training. He might have homed in on your house. He may come back. Benny may be yours. But it turned out that Benny homed with his coop. But what they will do is they specially train these birds and they facilitate what they need to learn how to be these expert flyers. They hand feed them, they care for them, and their training is they'll drive them a little distance away from home and then they fly back to their home because that's where they know they get taken care of and hand fed. And so gradually those distances increase and eventually some of these pigeons will fly thousands of miles and return home. And I think that's fascinating. But I loved it that through that story, they take these seemingly simple pigeons, turn them into these expert learners that know how to return back home and do all these things that would conceivably seem to be impossible. But you think about migration patterns of birds, they return to the same areas every year. And so that's what they're in essence kind of training these pigeons to do. So they're multiplying like natural instinct with this training process. So they're facilitating them. And that's what we as educators do with our students. We take our students, we have all this knowledge. We know the things that they don't know. We know what we want them to know. And we give them experiences that help our students go out into the world and then achieve those goals and do the things that they didn't think were possible. So I just loved that story. It made the whole chapter start off on a super positive note for me.
Well, and like one of the things that I thought was so neat, Diana, is they embraced like how the pigeon is genetically wired for specific roles at specific milestones of age, right? Which is what we've all learned about with early childhood classes and development. Like children are wired for specific milestones about certain ages, right? And that's kind of what we've used to sort of track, like, are we on track? Are we not? And so I kind of thought, you guys are going to laugh, but I kind of thought about like my own child. And if I can take every teacher that this child has had and sort of like, put them into like an infographic of like a pigeon fancier, right? Like that's kind of what we're talking about. Like all of these amazing educators that get to touch, one child's life is there working with genetics, working with specific milestones, facilitating from the side and doing that facilitating learning as opposed to that direct learning and really just truly letting them fly.
Such a good way to think of it.
It really is a good comparison. And it makes me think like at what point in this book, when they were writing the book, did that story go with that learning? Like It just works so seamlessly every time.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And then, I even think about, like my brother-in-law moved to California because that's where he's supposed to be. Right. But every time he comes home on a regular basis because it's fueling, like it's nourishing for his soul. And I just think that that's super cool to like embrace and put out there, that yes, go out, like go do things, but also reconnect as you need with whatever, homing might look like for you. Maybe it's a recipe, maybe it's, I don't know. So anyways, I was just thinking about that. And I was just very honored to be invited to join in on the conversation specifically for chapter 5 today, because as we talk about just that facilitation of learning, I think about core tasks that they outlined and how that can help students feel seen and supported. And here's the coolest thing about this book that I love was it doesn't matter the learning environment, if it's virtual or in person. And, the three of us talk about that a lot, how the learning environments have changed over the years, no matter the grade level, and how are our educators truly preparing themselves to prepare children to learn and to connect with the learning and to make sense of the learning and to truly be, lifelong learners. So they highlight three different things that I think is going to sound very familiar to us. One is build trust. Another one is to ensure equity. And the last one is to promote participation. And I got to tell you, it's present in the pigeon community too. I have like big notes off to the side. Like this is happening in the pigeon community too, which I just am laughing. But it is, at what point did the author sit there and think to herself, like, this is kind of what we do with children. So you guys,
it's true.
So let's talk about building trust. Voice and choice. Those have been used a lot. They rhyme, they sound good, but what does it really look like in your classroom, right? Because when we allow voice and choice, we also are allowing an element of risk. And a lot of students are used to sitting quietly and maybe nodding their head and yes, ma'am, or, whatever. But at the same time, like if you give them a platform, you've opened up a level of risk. And have you talked to your students about what that means to be a risk taker and to put yourself out there, right? So largely your environment is crucial, making sure that it is open, it is safe, it is a community environment where risks are embraced, where new things are, should be tried or dabbled in, and support is always offered because the environment lends itself to, if you need help, we got you, we're here for you, right? No fear, no judgment. So, and I felt very much at home because I teach a curriculum that is very much all about risk taking and problem solving. And a lot of times, the specific skill that I'm teaching, I will share with my students. Hey, this may not be something that you ultimately connect with, but you're making connections in your brain, and this is a safe space. We've got you. So if you make a mistake, like we're here, and to accept that constructive criticism is highly just valuable. So get to know your learners. See what you are doing on the daily to meet with students one-on-one. Maybe it's how the students enter the room. Maybe it's how you do check-ins. Maybe it's throughout the day. Are you able to work in small groups and just kind of, in that transition phase, like, hey, how was your weekend? I heard you had a basketball game, or I heard that you had your artwork on display, or I heard you're going to be in the play, or I heard that you were with your family at a horse show. Or talk to me. So those getting to know your students conversations can really help build trust, because when you engage with the student and they feel like they're the only ones, they feel seen, right? Examine your practices which encode trust. So this was a big one for me. The school says we embrace growth mindset. Like we are a school that says, make mistakes, fail. Maybe you can't do it yet. In our handbooks, it says there will be no test revisions. There will be no turning in work for revised credit. If I give you suggestions and revisions as feedback, that's a one-way road. I don't really expect you to do anything with it. And I stopped in my tracks because I thought, oh my goodness gracious, I myself, love feedback, but if I don't think I'm going to be doing anything with it, then what's my motivation to read it? And then what's my motivation to grow? So make sure that your school is, examining their practices and identifying where is trust, because if you share feedback and you've grown your learners to receive feedback, then there should be that give and take of, okay, now I've taken your feedback, I've worked on it, now look what I've done. Will you read this now? And so I just thought that was super super engaging on my end to connect with that and reflect. And then a two-way street. Oh my goodness, y'all. We ask students all the time, trust me, I'm your teacher. Trust me, trust me, trust me. But do we actually, students, are we lifting up our students and saying, I trust you. You're going to do great things. If I give you voice and choice, you're going to crush this, this verbal response, or this opportunity to show what you know. So building trust is crucial and definitely an element in the core tasks. I didn't know, Melissa and Diana, if what I said, I saw some thumbs up and some nods of the heads. Are you guys like, yes?
Yeah.
If there was anything you wanted to add, always chime in.
I didn't want to stop you. You were going.
You were
on a roll.
Yeah, you were on a good roll.
Very excited. Well, the next one that I wanted to touch on that I mentioned was ensuring equity. And, an effective facilitator is recognizing that strategic thinking and care planning are critical. And they're critical to providing equal opportunities to learn, participation in meaningful ways, and students can express what they know. So when you think about your scaffolds and your supports and your challenges that some students need, think about, maybe these might be great for everybody. So this is a big one for me, especially when it comes to my role as a technology integration specialist, because, with the devices that we now have access to, no matter the name of the device, there is so many wonderful ways of accessibility, for example. So if a student needs something read to them, or if a student needs the text enlarged, if a student needs, the ads to disappear from the website or whatever to kind of clear the noise, if you need to set timers or reminders, what's good for a few or one might be amazing for all. And so think about that, ensure equity and talk in your safe environment for learning about these tools, these scaffolds that may support one or more students, and how they could look as an opportunity for all of your students. Because who knows, maybe somebody's got a really bad earache and the last thing they want to do is put in headphones or earbuds, and they just need some closed caption going across the screen. And it's just a one-day thing. You would never maybe think that Amy needs that today, but today she does. So think about, how you're providing that. And when you provide it for all, then it's fair, right? And if you struggle with providing scaffolds, this was a good thing. Think about just the system that you're creating. Is it a one size fits all? Because I feel like sometimes when we're talking about the definition of success, that's kind of the environment that we've either grown up in, or that may be a culture. And so it's always good to rethink that. Like, how are we defining success? And when we do define success, are we defining it with the support of like scaffolds and supports and so forth? Or is that not even a thing because that's a sign of, and then maybe your community needs to have a real good reflective conversation about that to see what does that really mean for you. Maybe it's your grade level team, maybe it's your state. I mean, it could really be, it caused my wheels to turn. I don't know about you two, but it really did cause my wheels to turn, because I was like, oh man, I come from a very strict traditional school background many years ago. And so, I kind of laugh. I'm like, I don't know, it was reading things to me, they were like, do it, but now that's so different. And there's so many wonderful things that have grown and changed from that. And so I feel very honored to be part of a system, a part of a culture that can at least have these great conversations and think about what's good for one or a few might just be fantastic for all.
And facilitating students to understand what helps them best.
Yes.
They may not know. They may not know that they need this resource, and they would feel more successful if they engaged in it in this manner versus this manner. And so I think that is such an important piece of the step, that sometimes we make assumptions that students know how to help themselves. Because I come from that secondary background, so they're more independent learners. And I think sometimes that's the misstep that I would have made in the classroom, is I didn't take the time to get to know my students. Now, I think I try to do a very good job about that. So I'm going to be hypothetical here, but if I don't take the time to get to know my students, that's a piece I could be missing because I don't understand what makes them tick. And I don't maybe see some of the barriers that they may have or perceived barriers that they have.
I love that. It's like that accessibility tool belt, right? It's all there. It's just, how do you know what to use when?
Absolutely.
And I'm so glad you said that. Yes. One of the final core tasks that they talked about in chapter 5 was that promoting participation. And regardless if I've been in a kindergarten room or in a 6th grade room, or even just working with grownups in a professional development session, this has always been something that has filled my heart as a great conversation to continue to reflect on. And so when you think about participation in your classroom during a lesson, during an activity, what does it really look like? Because in UDL, it's all about options, choices, and then taking those to the next level, right? And so traditionally, it would be like, teacher asks a question. I'm thinking Ferris Bueller here. I don't know if you guys are. Like, yep. And then students supposed to respond, probably in a traditional sense by raising their hand, waiting to be called on. And then that response is evaluated by the teacher on, is it right, is it wrong? And then they may just direct in with that one student on why it may have been right and why it may have been wrong. Okay, well, the pros and cons are, the student that was picked may or may not be ready for what was coming their way, even if they had their hand raised. I've had that before. And then only one person is participating, really. I mean, like, you're locked into that one student. They're, just obviously focused on themselves. So what's everybody else doing? And how are you gauging what they're doing? So some great options came up in this chapter about some ways to promote participation and to allow students to really participate, to interact, to engage. And it was not just that one at a time traditional way. Have you guys ever used the Google or Doodle example that they gave in the book? It was, I've done something similar, but because I'm with elementary, I'm not typically, unless I've trained them to research safely on the internet, that wouldn't be like a first go-to for me. But with my secondary kiddos, absolutely assuming that they know, that digital citizenship. But it was super interesting that, teacher poses a question, sets a timer, and you have options of how you are going to successfully respond to your teacher, because at the end of that timer, you've got to have some kind of a response to the question. And maybe it's a drawing, maybe it's a concept map, maybe it's a collaboration where you turned and talked, maybe it's a chat that you created on a doc or something. Maybe you Googled it and you bookmarked some great places of where you found some content. And then there's that share time. And maybe it's added in on a like a community board or excuse me, again, like a shared platform. Maybe it is a place where it is time to like come and reflect and share. Maybe it's visible on a wall. But I thought that was super awesome. Super awesome. Yeah. Another tradition is that group discussion. Like, let's talk. And I loved how one of the first things to think about when hosting a group discussion is, sure, you've got some kids talking, but are you really a part of every single conversation? And who's really on task and who's off task, right? So that was pretty awesome. And then, of course, students who monopolize the conversation, they constantly have their hand raised, they constantly want to add value, they constantly have something to share, they're super passionate about it, and they're like, I've got so much to tell you, and I'm going to talk, and I'm going to share stories, I'm going to go on and on. So just kind of understanding those social expectations of a group discussion. But, once you talk about like participation and what it can look like in your classroom, the class together can come and create some norms for those social expectations. And I thought that was pretty cool. So there's going to be some clear expectations that we're going to create together. And maybe it's through a rubric. Maybe it's, again, visible. Maybe it's just like a phrase that's, kind of a call and response. That's what I'm looking for, before you begin your group discussion. But I thought about that. And then one last thing with the promoting participation, how we're grouping our students. And I saw, like, I wrote in my notes in capital letters, flexible, and then the greater than sign over fixed. And I thought that was super awesome because we know that, but when we're grouping, are we truly, applying that? And so, like, right now, I've got kiddos, in partner groups, and the first question that they ask is, are these going to be our partners forever? And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, like, where have you been conditioned that one person is your, like, your
Life
eighth period
partner.
partner for life? Yeah, your life partner. And so, yeah, I was like, no. But then I'm like, okay, there's got to be a reason for why you're asking me that. And so I just thought that was super interesting that my kiddos were so incredibly respectful. And these are sixth graders that were like, yeah, absolutely. I'll work with this other human. I don't know what happened at lunch that day. I don't know if they hang out after school. I mean, I'm hoping that the more I get to know them, this is, conversation for beginning of the year, that I do realize that, and I'll take that into consideration. But I also want to allow in my community that that value and that appreciation for this is a safe space. All are welcome. And so I'm going to do my best to build trust by getting to know you. I'm going to help you make sure that you know that there are, equitable resources and activities and methods and policies and procedures and ways for learning to ensure that. And then I'm going to help you participate because I want you to show what you know and just truly, connect with that learning. This is lots in those core tasks, but
There's just so much. Like we've talked about this. We talked about this off screen, on screen. There was so much good content in this chapter. And I think Melissa and I, every time we get on here, we're like, this was the great chapter. They're all great chapters. And I love that we've been able to parcel it out bit by bit and really focus in and look on the different things. Cause this has just been really meaningful to think about my role as an educator, whether I'm working with students, whether I'm working with adults. And that facilitation piece is a newer concept. When I was in the classroom, it wasn't necessarily something that I knew as much about. And so now sometimes I wish I could go back to the classroom forearmed with this knowledge that I have. And I think about how differently I might do things. So I loved the next phase of the book gets into coaches and learning partners. And the former athlete in me, the extracurricular activity person, I loved the analogy that they had there because I don't know why I didn't think of it before, because coaches, they're teachers too. And so, but the way the coaches, byproduct of being that activity, it's set up, they do a whole group. They do like a station rotation when you do your drills. And then because they are bouncing back and forth between these groups, they're giving feedback in the moment, in real time, that is actionable and meaningful and personal to their athletes. And so if we employ those same types of approaches in the classroom, we can do the same things with the tasks that we have. It's just not how we were taught, and it's not how we initially think about it. And it can be a little messy and it can be loud. But in the end, if that's what's best for our students, and that's where the importance of the feedback is, that they need to be able to do something with it. They need it in a timely fashion. If I just give them feedback and then it stops there and they don't get a chance to put it into action, is the feedback that meaningful? And so Catlin, no, it wasn't Catlin. Was it Catlin? Mm-hmm. It was Catlin's story. It was Kate had Benny, and it was Catlin that had the story about her cross country coach. And I laughed because as I was reading through this, I was making a personal connection to my superintendent, he's not a cross country coach anymore, but he was a phenomenal cross country coach. And I could imagine him being a similar coach to what Catlin had, where she was a soccer player who was really doing cross country to try to be in better shape for another sport. But he took the time to ask, and he wanted to know, what are your goals? Why are you doing this? What do you want to get out of it? And he didn't make her feel ashamed for the fact that she said, I really just want to be in better shape for another sport. And I don't know how invested I am here, and so he went through then and worked with her on those goals. And he would give her feedback that she could put into action that made her have better form, so she didn't get cramps, that would help her with her endurance. And then he levied a challenge at her that she immediately, the reflex was to go, I can't do that. And he said, I don't want to hear I can't. And he pushed her. We always hear this, you can do hard things. And we can, but sometimes they're scary, and we need somebody to believe in us before we maybe believe in ourselves. And that's what this coach did for her, because he thought she could do it. And through that process he invested time to build a relationship with her, he and his other runners, and then he would give that actionable feedback that she could put into practice. He could give her feedback on what she was doing still then. So, no, you're not quite doing it right. You need to tweak this little aspect of it. And then he actually came on the other side and had a really successful team. She found somebody that she believed in and that believed in her, and she trusted. She developed that coach developed that relationship with Catlin and the teammates, and they had the trust. And then what they ended up with was a really successful team. And I think that's amazing.
And that's what we want.
That's what we want. And that could happen in the physical classroom as well.
Yeah. So I think that goes down to, you can compare that so easily with our role as coaches in the classroom and teachers in the classroom. And so what we have to do is know our students and what motivates them. So regardless if we are looking at a coach to teacher or teacher to student, we have to know our students and what motivates them personally. And I have always liked to call this their currency. So what works for them individually. And you can find the best ideas for motivating students and all of these plans and all these ideas on social media. But if it doesn't fit your own students' needs, it's not going to work. So sometimes you have to look at those pretty ideas and say that works for them, but what works for me? And how do you do that? Well, you have to talk to your kids. And like Diana said, you have to get to know them individually and as a whole. And only then will you be ready to give them the options that fit their needs. So as you're developing your lessons with the choices, the voice and the choice, you can see if students are choosing videos or audio excerpts over text-based options. And then when you've established the relationship with them that you already have, then you can find out, why are you picking videos? Why are you picking audio every time? And you can find out why they're not picking a text article to read. And use that information as you make changes in further lessons. So some of that information, that relationship, that gives you such great payoff in so many ways. You can include your students in goal setting, and that will put them right at the center of their learning. And that's exactly what we want. And that will just give us information as the facilitator. And so that will only help us to make that experience even more meaningful for our students. So we can use our conversations with them to ask questions about what makes them want to achieve and why their own goals are personally meaningful for them. So we talked a lot about feedback as well. And feedback is so important as that learning progresses, like Diana said. And thinking about a traditional athletic coach, they have the ability to make an impact with feedback. They give out feedback, and athletes have an opportunity to make corrections in practice. And oftentimes it's instant. In schools, it sometimes gets pushed aside because of the time schedule or the way the class schedule is set up. So students turn in work almost in isolation. If it's homework, they turn it in at night. And then it's graded and it's returned back in isolation. The student gets it, they look at their feedback, they know what their grade is. If they're not doing anything with that feedback, what's the learning? So we need to get that process of providing feedback into the classroom so that it can be meaningful and useful and actually have something come right from that feedback. So I guess we have to look directly at that as a facilitator, and how does that factor into your planning as well?
And, it can feel so overwhelming, right, Melissa? Like,
Right.
because we know we know that, but like, how do you actually show up tomorrow, enter your classroom with the actual physical humans that are going to enter and make it happen?
Right.
And so, a lot of times it just seems like this giant, existence. And it's like, oh, this is just too overwhelming to think about. And so finding balance is super key because we talk about finding balance. Yes, yes, yes. But I want to talk just a little bit more specific about that because I think that can help what we were just talking about seem a little bit more easy to implement, right?
Mhm.
So if you are, for example, assigning some work and you're thinking to yourself, everything on this assignment is important. I'm going to grade everything. I'm going to give feedback on everything. I've got this gorgeous rubric. I'm going to score all the stuff. Most likely, because I know I would probably maybe be doing this before I didn't know what I didn't know, taking it all home and spending hours going through every single student, every single thing. When instead, maybe I could rethink what's actually currently happening in my classroom, which is most likely a station rotation, right? Or a small group rotation, or a one on one conference time, or a success time, or, there's something happening during my day where I could maybe possibly rethink it. And instead of me with students in a smaller conversation environment and offering some teaching, what if I was offering some feedback and correction time, right? Over one or maybe two identified areas that I'm specifically going to be looking at. And so I thought, oh my gosh, like this is not only good for me as a teacher, but it's good for students to identify. Like it doesn't always have to be a big thing. And so, like when you're working with them, be like, okay, so for this activity, start to finish, this is what our expectations are. This is the criteria. These are the constraints. And this is specifically what I'm offering feedback on. So when you come to my station, this is what we're going to be talking about. And you better be ready because I'm going to have maybe 7 of you at a time. And I got to get through and make sure that you hear my feedback. But when are you going to get the teaching that would have normally happened there? Maybe we can rethink the way we were doing that. Possibly that is pushed out ahead of time. Possibly that is, absorbed by students or delivered by teachers in, from opportunities like what we're doing right now through conversations, trying to figure out what works best for you. So having a procedure is going to be key for this because I was thinking about, an example I just did with my 6th graders where we were all on a shared, doc and I had it all open so everybody could be working on it and they all knew, where they were supposed to be and what they were supposed to be doing, but there was a procedure because otherwise it would have been like, he's in my area and she just deleted this and why do you keep highlighting my stuff. So it's like we need to create those social norms that we talked about earlier. And so we did that and using maybe the comment feature as a way to put your hand up. And so there's different tools that you can use with students if they're working just with you in a small group and you want to provide feedback, or if you want to have a certain time of your day offered to giving feedback, but all the students are currently working on their work and they know that you're live on that same platform as well, checking in on them and so forth. So I thought that was super, key to talk about with teachers because we all know feedback is great, but how does it actually look, right? And so when it does come through, keeping it focused and actionable. I worked a lot with some of my math coaches on this because focused and actionable, keep it, clear, concise, easy to read, and then the students know what to do with it. So more than just text comments was a recommendation from this chapter, which I thought was super awesome because I don't know that I have ever done video feedback. However, I have on Seesaw done a lot of audio feedback so they can hear my voice because I do feel like it's awesome to teach kiddos the power of what you read in text may not always convey voice if the author didn't, maybe with word choice or punctuation or what have you. So I thought that was super interesting.
Connotation can be lost just in text.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I thought that was, like something to think about. Like maybe your feedback is in audio buttons or provided in, a video format and so forth. But this was huge. I wanted to kind of pop this up here if I can show this, like this graphic that was in the story. I'm a very visual person. And so when it talked about the zone of proximal development, and here, you've got at the core, what the learner can do on their own without the support or guidance of a coach or teacher. So I'm thinking about my students, whether we're in a small group or whole group, like what can they do on their own? Then the next layer is what the learner is capable of doing with support and guidance. And then that final layer is what is the learner not yet capable of, even with support. So thinking about your mastery-oriented feedback and, keeping that zone of proximal development in mind. How do you know how your students are doing? Collect assessment data frequently, give feedback to your students while they're working, while they're right there, and then conference with them as much as you can. It can look like a little kneeling down by their chair. It can look like, walking up and around the tables, the desks. It can look like small group. It can look like an organized time. It can be formal. It can be informal. And this is one of my favorites, letting them know that you believe in them. I thought that was super awesome. I think about, we just finished our parent teacher conference time and giving comments on report cards. And it's just like, there's so much joy in every student, and it's up to me to see it, right? Even if maybe others may have a hard time seeing that. And so I think about that with my feedback. What did you do really well? What is something that you need to work on? And then what's a suggestion for as you move forward? Something that I'm actually adding in myself to accompany this with mastery-oriented feedback is the tag method. Teaching students to give each other that feedback, tell them something. So if you read your peers' response, tell them something about what they wrote, and then ask them a question about what they wrote, and then give them a suggestion for next steps. And I love that recipe because it helps students be very organized, as opposed to being like, sweet, nice job, or some more like, new fun slang words, like slay. I'm like, what does that even mean? So I love the focused and actionable feedback, and then allowing yourself to think through, okay, I'm gonna be clearly communicative about what I'm doing. I'm going to make sure that students know exactly what I'm looking at, and they know when that feedback's going to happen, and they know that I believe in them.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about teachers and students communicating with one another, but we also need to talk about what Amy just touched on, which is about learners connecting with each other. And that's why they talk about the community of inquiry framework, which was new to me. And that was developed to understand teaching and learning in online and blended learning environments specifically. So there's 3 different and overlapping presences, which is what they call them, in the community of inquiry. And then these 3 presences collectively in the learning community support students as they construct knowledge. And the 3 things, which are overlapping circles, are the social presence, the teaching presence, and the cognitive presence. And they all 3 work together equally, but the one that was most touched on seems to have the most importance, and the relationships and is the one that stood out to me as well, was the social presence, especially in an online community or a blended community, because it's the student's ability to project their social and emotional selves in the blended or online class. So it's what really allows them to view their classmates as real people with beliefs and values and feelings, when all they know them from is a screen. So you can see why that importance to engage with one another, it would be so important and would have that direct impact on learning. So we don't want them just logging on, doing their exercise, you know, clicking thumbs up and then out. We want them definitely engaging with one another, doing some sort of a discussion, working in groups, so that they really are getting to know one another. The teacher has that ability to facilitate and provide the students with the experiences, which is why the teacher in this kind of a situation is so important to develop the social presence. And then the behaviors that actually develop from that strong social presence are the same behaviors that are important in an in-person environment. It allows students to be able to express themselves, to be able to understand the values, beliefs, and feelings, not only of other people, but of themselves, and be able to have open and purposeful communication amongst each other, and have that sense of feeling of connectedness to the learning community. And so these are all outcomes we want for all students. And I think it's so important that for students that are in an online or blended environment, that we are promoting all of these things. So Diana, can you help us with some tips or ideas that would help us get there?
So focusing in first on the expressing values, beliefs, and feelings. This is something I used to teach speech in a former life, and we start talking about when you teach and you're giving these speeches, you are really thinking a lot of times bringing that personal element in there. And when you do this, this is something I'm passionate about, because you have to know your learners. You have to know your audience. You have to know who you're working with. And this is going to go back to something Amy said earlier when it talks about you have to be a little bit of a risk taking here, because you're going to make yourself feel, you're making yourself vulnerable when you really share those personal components about yourself. And that's something that can be intimidating for students if they're in an environment that they don't feel supported. And, you know, just jumping right into a class, especially at that secondary level, it may be a group of students that they've seen, but they don't really know. So you have to work to build that community where they feel safe doing this. And so having students play an active role in the establishment of class agreements and norms, rather than them being teacher-led, this helps those students get involved with that, and it makes them take ownership in that, and they work together to do this. They start to learn a little bit more about each other. The learning community has to also spend time getting to know one another. And Melissa talked about that just a little bit again, but they talk about some ideas that you can do through icebreakers, through check-ins, routines, discussions, things like that. And there's a lot of good examples in the book, but something that really stuck out to me, and as I'm a passionate Canvas user, and there is somebody that I have gotten to know through the Canvas community, and she really focused on the importance of developing relationship with students. And she teaches at a community college, but one of the approaches that she took, I thought was so applicable, especially to the secondary world, but I think you could take it down and figure out ways to scaffold it so that it would be appropriate for middle school and elementary as well. And she did like these social emotional type check-ins. And so she would have, and it's similar to the Brene Brown example in the book of where you give a 2-word feeling. And so to backtrack out on these check-ins, she would have the students tell her things that were good for them, like things that were going well, things that they were struggling with, like, you know, and it didn't have to be related to the class. And so this may be unfamiliar to your students at first, and this was more like student teacher interaction. But then what she could do is that would lead her to facilitate student to student interaction down the line. And so it became, at the community college level, those students were dealing with things like, I have to work extra hours because I can't pay my rent, or maybe I'm a single parent and I'm struggling with this. I think in the high school level, I think of those things that my students in a safe space would maybe feel comfortable telling me that, like, I'm sorry, I sleep in your class because I can't sleep at home. I don't feel safe. Or I sleep in your class because I'm working to help my family keep the lights on. And I think about that middle school area where it can be so drama filled. But if you focus people, they can focus on the negative and what's bringing them attention. But if you challenge them and have them zero in on something that's positive in their life, that can change that narrative and change maybe their perspective a little bit. So I love that, but I think it breeds right into the Brene Brown example of the 2-word feelings. Identify how you're feeling in 2 words. And it allows students to name what they're feeling without judgment. And it gets them thinking about what's going on in their world. And so what it does is that helps students then, by creating that sense of community and joining them together, then it allows them to feel safe being vulnerable to express those values, those beliefs, and those feelings. And then that segues on into the next component of it, which is that open and purposeful communication that Melissa's going to talk about.
Sorry, I was muted.
You're okay.
Okay. So we are talking my language with open and purposeful communication because discussion is my jam. I have to talk things out to truly understand a concept. And it makes sense because research shows that discussions really do help learners construct meaning and confirm what they already know. And so that's where I am. If I think I know something, I still have to talk about it. Hearing others' perspectives really does bring new ways of thinking and encourages inquiry. And so this can be used for higher order thinking, as students are not just passively learning, sitting and listening, or letting others do the talking, but participating in the conversations as they are facilitated by the teacher. Discussions can be done in many ways. It can be whole group, it can be small group, it can be done in pairs. An example given in the book is a 4 corners activity where students are mixed up every time. So that would eliminate, like Amy said, are these going to be my partners for the rest of the year? No, we should always be mixing that up. Online discussions can be used as well, but those routines have to be taught so that meaningful responses and replies are submitted, like we talked about. I think any discussion is good discussion, whether the students are face-to-face, virtual, or blended.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sense of group cohesion is really like it comes out of that safety net of, okay, my values, beliefs, and feelings are valid and welcomed here. This is a safe space. The communication is going to be open, but it's going to be purposeful. There's nothing more like enjoyable, I think, as a teacher, but also as a student, than when you get a conversation going and the kids are like, they're so engaged that they don't even realize the bell is rung, right? But that sense of group cohesion is key, and it can be in person and it can be virtual too. But ultimately, I think the 2 big things to think about with this is that the facilitator is crucial, and this does not happen overnight. This is not a magic wand thing. Yeah, we need to make sure that, we're building into this. So regardless if you've got breakout rooms, if you're teaching virtually and that's your procedure and you have set the norms and you've got that community where students are leaning on each other for assistance, for feedback, and for brainstorming, for talking it out. Maybe it's a back channel, maybe it's a space that you have facilitated or opened up and you've taught the norms, the expectations for that. The more that learners have a sense of, community, and they know that they've got others to lean on, including you as a facilitator, the more they feel that strong sense of group cohesion, which ultimately, is going to lead to that connection to the learning. So it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. So I think throughout this entire chapter, we've had a lot that we were passionate about. We've had a lot to share. If you've been hanging along with us through our previous chapters, we had a whole bunch more to go here, but we've kind of come to the end of our time together. So we're going to leave you with our reflection. So all the questions are very good, but we thought that this one, as we think about being a facilitator and the importance of that feedback that is focused and actionable, we like this reflection question that challenges you to think about how you currently provide feedback to your learners. And then how do you ensure that learners are using the feedback to become more expert learners? And I'm assuming that if you're like me, then I'm going to have to be thinking about changes I would maybe make to my practice to ensure that I'm doing this, because this is definitely an ongoing process and doesn't happen overnight, as Amy said. And it's going to take some time to put into practice. And you're also probably going to fail forward on it a little bit. You're going to try something new and it may not work exactly the way you want, but you're going to figure out how to take that and build on it. Because I love that idea of failing forward. So thank you again for spending time with us for Chapter 5, Facilitation, or Facilitator, Channeling Your Inner Pigeon Fancier. And we hope that you will take advantage of this chapter, the previous chapters. They're all available on our Keep Indiana Learning playlist on YouTube, which you can access through this handy dandy QR code right there if you would like. And we really appreciate Amy taking time to join us today. I always love listening to Amy talk. I always say, and Amy, I don't think I've ever said this to you, but you're one of those people that I don't know how you can be in your presence and not feel good and smile, because you always are positive and you always bring so much insightful thought to the table. So I always love to listen to you talk.
Thank you so very much for having me. Thank you. That was so kind.
Well, I appreciate you as one of my learning partners in this path of this job that we're doing. So we are going to see you in a couple weeks. We'll be back with Chapter 6. We have another special guest joining us, and we're excited to continue on this journey through UDL and blended learning. Thanks for joining us.